So this is the Architects of Light manual, and it's nice. It has some like basic definitions here. And I told Leona I did start like I guess basically like an eternal nature dictionary so that
Mm-hmm.
we can define words, because how we define our words matters. Um
Mm-hmm.
and really can shift things. But so this is like the kind of foundational information that I would like to get us to understanding, particularly here. Scalar waves are points of standing waves. Standing means it's not moving, it's staying in one place, composed of quantities of consciousness that emanate out of fixed points of vibration and form ultra microparticle units called particae, particae, particum. So let's relate that to things that we know, like the electrons and protons and neutrons, right?
Mm-hmm.
If we are curious about our reality, and we may have heard things like that this is just a hologram, or that we're in a simulation, or you might have heard that your thoughts and your words are creating your reality. And there's a lot of very heady ideas about like, what does that mean? In my studies, and I in my life I've studied the earth sciences, right? And medicine, and also Christianity. And what I figured out was that at basically the end of all of those, of all of them, is a question mark. Like, nobody actually really knows. Our sciences have come up with pieces and have developed some theories about how things work, based basically just on what they can see. They're using their eyes and observing, and in our current science paradigm, there's no room for anything that you cannot see with your physical, with your eyes, or or touch. So that is very limiting. Yeah. And it didn't actually always used to be that way. That's not that this whole model of science has only been around really the last 100 years, with Rockefeller, with this double blind placebo, whatever, peer reviewed. And this is the only thing that counts as science. It used to be like back, even with Da Vinci, Michelangelo, there seemed to be more room for experiential accounts. Yes, that um a person's lived experience was valid. And you don't get that in science anymore. Even if I had this very real, experience, if it's nothing that they can see and touch, it 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 was just in my mind. So what does
Mm.
that mean? I think if we think about an atom, and we think about the atom, let's think about it like a ball, and in the middle is the nucleus and protons, and then there's electrons spinning around that nucleus, different number of them depending what it's an atom of. Yeah. And the electrons spin, they follow a somewhat consistent orbital pattern, not dissimilar from how our planets orbit our sun. The electrons are orbiting the nucleus. And if you like, my table here is very hard. If I punched it, I would hurt my hand. But if I zoom in with my microscope and look at the atoms of this wood, what am I going to find? Am I going to find anything solid? No. I'm going to find 99% empty space. I'm going to find charged particles spinning. So somehow my body and my mind interpret this empty space here that has these charged particles spinning in a specific mathematical way. My brain interprets this as rock hard, even though there's really not anything there but empty space. So how is it possible that that can happen? And this is something that this is what I've been wondering about this forever. So what I would like to invite everyone to do is to consider that perhaps we've been looking at understanding these things backwards. And so it's the current common position that our consciousness, so what's our consciousness is the part of us that looks out of our eyes, that are to see ourselves in the mirror. It's the part of us that is making words, right? The existence, our awareness, that is us, our consciousness, is a product of our brains and our bodies, that our physicality, magically came together somehow, and it came together in such a way as to create the consciousness. And when the brain dies and the body dies, the consciousness is not there anymore. When you look at this from this scientific paradigm, it is very difficult to answer the hard questions. So what I want to do is go on a journey where we're going to flip that, and we're going to look at what we know from a perspective of the consciousness comes first. It's actually the consciousness that is directing and creating everything that we see. Your consciousness and source consciousness. God God is consciousness, right? Consciousness is God, and consciousness is energy. Even if you don't agree with it, let's pretend that that's true for now. And if we use this perspective, now let's go on a journey and see, well, does that make things make sense, right? So what I'm stating as a foundational perspective is that consciousness equals energy. Energy equals consciousness. Also equals source. Source equals consciousness equals energy. So when we're talking about electrons, protons, we're talking about microscopic particles, yeah, that carry a charge. So what does that mean to carry a charge? So we have a positive charge, we have a negative charge, and then in place of the word neutral, I'm going to be using the word omnipolar. So the difference would be that something that is neutral, we understand that carries no charge, does not carry plus, does not carry minus, carries no charge, it's a stable, versus the word omnipolar, which does also carry an overall neutral charge. However, it contains within it not only that neutrality, but it contains both of the polarities also inside of it. So we call that omnipolar. So we have the polarities, and then we have the omnipolar, which is the reunification or the back together when those poles come together. This is also a different concept from our science here, which tells us that every action has an equal and opposite reaction. It tells us that there's the yin and the yang, there's the black and the white, and it's always the two, and it does not ever include the three. And it's in that third ball, or it's in that third option, where we find the place of reunification. And so it's been something that we're going to introduce. It's been something that's been missing, that's been removed, and now we're going to include that in our perspective here. So particles, we're talking about what is a charge. If a particle has a charge, what does that mean? We put a little plus and a minus. It means if it's a positive, it's talking about a force. It's talking about an outward moving force. And so if we think of particles, let's think of balls, spheres. So a particle that carries a positive charge would be like the masculine, would be the light. This is outward moving energy, transmitting, yes, versus the negative charge or the magnetic is inward moving. It's moving from the outside back into the core versus from the core outward. So that's what we mean when we think of a charge. We're talking about, so when we're talking about atoms, we're talking about charged particles. So a little particle that is exhibiting a force, and the forces of those charged particles, because of their mathematical relationship to each other, those forces interact in a specific way to create what we know as an atom, right? Or an element or a molecule or this solid table that's in front of me. But when we start to zoom in, we've got mostly empty space. So these particles, we're going to walk backwards. We know about electrons and protons. Those particles, those electrons and protons, if we walk it all the way back, what we're going to find out is that when Source created creation, Source being an endless, eternal, infinite field of undividuated, undifferentiated consciousness, awareness. So I'll use the word FE, the eternal first field intelligence, vast, unending, created out of its consciousness, right? Source is consciousness. And in the focusing of its attention, created the very first particle, which is much smaller than an electron, but we can we can use this idea of neutrons and protons and electrons to understand what I'm going to call part of chi and part of k and part of cum. And these are individual units of the consciousness of Source. And this is what is the smallest building block out of which everything else is made out of. And it's the omnipolar or the neutral and the two polarities. The part of chi is the omnipolar, part of cum is the magnetic negative charge, part of k is the masculine electrical positive charge. And it is the interaction of those for the first two particuli that is what shows us how eternal life and perpetual motion creation and eternal life is possible, and how Source created it and how Source is perpetually recreating it trillions of times per nanosecond.
Yeah, this is really good information to realize that eternal life is a thing, right? You know, eternal life is a thing instead of like, um, death, and then there's nothing else after that. But as we know, that energy can't be created or destroyed, but now we're like seeing how it is created. It phases over and over and over and over again, you know? And I guess that
So
might
it's
go
not
ahead.
technically not created. It's just it's the already existing consciousness of Source, right? That it Source will basically change itself, its own consciousness, into all these other forms of energy and consciousness in order to first create a structure, a template, and then and then into that template, Source is going to send another kind of energy that is us, that is an individuated portion of itself. It will send into that structure to go live it, to go experience it. So it's always the consciousness of Source putting itself into different forms, but it never is destroyed. It never can be destroyed. Even fall, even when you go fall, and we call it space dust, you've returned to individual units of consciousness of source, but the consciousness, it's still there.
Mhm.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, this is yeah, just the it's interesting to realize that we are necessarily not our bodies, but our consciousness. And that's the kind what you're saying is that the fabric of existence is consciousness and energy.
Yes.
That is thinking about but that concept.
This is a big concept because it's a real paradigm buster, I call it, because what if everything around you is conscious? Like, would that change how you interact with your world? If you saw the tree outside as a person, how would you go about trimming its branches? Might you do
Mm.
that differently? If you knew that the water you were about to drink is conscious, might you interact with it first before you chug it down? Like it's a very deep question to consider, and the implications of that truth will reverberate through everything. At least it does for me. That was that was a real I like that word paradigm buster. But that's
No, I think it really does. And to know that a paradigm buster happens on many levels. And as we were talking about our mental faculties that we're like looking out on the world, but we also have the emotional of what that means to say you talk about trimming a branch. What does that do emotionally? And so many layers that can like start to shift. For me, what comes up just right now in this moment in time is like, um, I'm not religious at all, but when I put my mind if like, who was Jesus, when you think of Jesus, right? How did he walk in this world, right? Like,
yeah.
when he like just put yourself in the shoes of what it mean to walk in that like maybe that presence of what you think we think about. And I feel like that maybe signals the fact that he was aware of a lot of these levels of looking around in the world, looking at people a different way.
Yes. Yeah. He said, "You will do greater things than these," didn't he?
Yeah.
He
And when
saw
he says
us
I don't
as
yeah,
equals.
yeah, I don't see sickness. Like he almost like Neo, he saw the codes. Like I don't see sickness. What do you mean? Like he was the blueprint. He wasn't like the exception. Well, we were yeah talking about just the fabric of reality, I guess. Uh,
Well,
I
so who
still
cares? Who cares, right? Like, so what? So let's say everything. So what does it actually mean? Like, what good does this understanding do for me? And I just would like to point out that the knowledge of much of this is literally encoded in our bodies. It's what they call junk DNA. And as we are exposed to these spiritual sciences, this knowledge is the knowledge of our ancient civilizations that were here. It's the ancient future knowledge, really, that we forgot, that now we're remembering, and it's in your body. And when your body looks at these codes and these manuals and hears these words and these sound tones, even if your conscious mind isn't understanding and remembering everything that's being said, understand that it's going into your system. You are a reality generating machine. Just like now this is dating myself, but when I watched movies, they were on film, yeah? And they'd put film into this camera and it would project a movie onto the screen. Your body is that camera, okay? And so the film would be your consciousness, your thoughts, your emotions. everything that's all the information that you're taking in and how that's being processed by your nervous system is what is deciding what movie is it going to be showing up there on the screen. Our bodies are is constantly bringing in this energetic stimulus with all of our senses and interpreting it and allowing us to have a physical experience. Here we go. This is where we started, the holographic template. Consciousness is energy, and energy is conscious. The externalization of life, manifestation of matter, and individuation of identity are holographic projections of consciousness energy substance created through an intrinsic order of energetic relationships. So like I said, there's these tiny, ultra tiny particles, and they're spinning, they're spinning on their own axis. And just like our solar system, they're also orbiting, right? They're revolving and they're spinning. Yes. And and this is true on through very many levels, on all of these levels. And there is a precise mathematical relationship of all of these particles, everything from the particle up to the body, up to the planet, to the sun. Everything has a mathematical relationship to everything else that's around it. When all of those energetic relationships are in divine order, we have all the circuits connected. There's a complete circuit. It's all flow. The energy can flow all the way out from source, and we can send backflow and send energy back. But however, when the mathematical relationship changes, then that changes everything. So we're going to look at that, and we're going to look at, well, how is it supposed to work? And then what is happening? Why are we experiencing finite life? If you're telling me that source created an eternal creation, like, where is it? Like, what's happening here? Once we understand how it's supposed to work, it's much simpler to understand why what's happening here is causing what it's causing. True science has a spiritual core, and true spirituality has its intrinsic translation within the laws of energy that govern the manifestation of universal systems. So this is saying God made the science. God is the science. Science is God and God is science. Yeah. And there is a place where those two things come together, and that makes a lot of sense. So our reality, our hologram, is truly a thought construction. That is how source first created. It first had a desire to create, that became an emotion, that became a thought. What are we doing when we have a thought? We're focusing our attention onto a point. When we have a thought, we're focusing our attention onto that single thought. Yeah. The focusing of attention is our superpower, quite literally. And this is how source first creates everything. The focusing of source's attention causes a warming in the substance, the non-substance that is the unnameable source, causes a warming to happen, and the warming makes things change. When you cook an egg, it goes from being clear goop to hard and white. Heat changes the structure of things, and that heat built up, building, until you have electricity, until you have a spark. This came from source's thought, and focused attention creates that spark that becomes an idea crystal, that then becomes the template on which everything begins to congeal or manifest. So reality is thought construction. The core substance of the cosmos is consciousness. Thought is an attribute of consciousness. It is the filter through which consciousness manifests itself into the hologram of form. Nothing is truly solid. All things are composed of consciousness, and their apparent solidity is determined by the relationship between the consciousness observing and the consciousness of which the form is made. Human consciousness emerges through an order of dimensionalization. This sets a framework within which the interrelationships of consciousness can take place. Human perception of solidity, of solid objects, and externalized reality, all these things we think are happening out there somewhere, is determined by the oscillation rates between dimensionalized units of consciousness. What's oscillation? Everybody's familiar with vibration. Yes. So in KS terminology, and we'll put this in the dictionary, vibration is an attribute of sound. Sound vibrates, light oscillates. So when it says oscillation rate, that means how fast are particles of light spinning. Yeah. Versus vibration is how fast is the sound wave moving. Okay. So dimensionalized units of consciousness. Dimensionalized units of consciousness. What's that mean? A dimension is a specific band of frequency. So if you think about a rainbow, every color in the rainbow is its own frequency. It's the same as, you could also call all of those colors dimensions. It's a band of frequency that's stacked on top of each other and interrelated to itself in a specific way. So dimensionalized units of consciousness form frequencies of energy which exist in specific relationships to each other. The human consciousness, our soul or spirit, and the human physical form are patterns of frequency formed by dimensionalization of conscious units. So there's a template, an energetic template we call the Cathar grid, and it sets the pattern for those dimensionalized bands of frequency. And then source lights it on fire, sends in the flame down the center column. That is the individual, that when the individual consciousness goes into that template too, now into those dimensions, now we're able, that is what going into those dimensionalized bands is what allows our consciousness, our soul, our spirit to then experience this physical form. So we perceive manifest solidity due to the relationship between the consciousness that we're made of and the consciousness of the field that's around us. Our relationship to it is what decides, is what allows us to experience this reality as a solid. The only difference between a thought of a phone and the phone in your hand is the frequency of the consciousness of the observer. Manifest reality is thought projection made solid and externalized by the relationships between the frequencies of our focus of attention and those of the projected thought forms. We perceive as reality the thought forms of the collective masses as they were placed within the frequency bands that now exist one dimension below the frequencies within which our present focus of collective consciousness is stationed. So if reality is a thought field composed of units of conscious awareness, then that means reality can be directly affected by thought, as the substance of both thought and reality are one and the same. The key to mastery of our present reality and to restoring our imprint for health, and this is getting to the point of why, who cares what reality is made out of. Why do we care about any of this? It's because when our minds begin to change their thoughts, we can change everything, anything. This is our power, our thoughts, and how we focus our attention. So, the key to mastery of our present reality and to restoring our imprint for health is understanding the reality of dimensionalization within which our consciousness now resides. Because, we might be talking about the structure of the planet or the solar system, but it's the same for our bodies. Yeah. And so we can also reprogram our bodies. We can heal ourselves. We can regenerate. We we can do all these things. We just forgot, and we've been through a lot, right? There's been a lot going on that has really screwed up how this process is working and also our knowledge of how this works. But this is a very amazing time because we get to know this again. And there's, to me, nothing more exciting on the planet right now. If my body is a holographic projection of my consciousness, that means that almost everything I understood from medicine is not correct. It's not relevant. It's a totally different way to exist and to heal, and it's changed my life very drastically, especially in the last 6 years. But I have never, I can't, I might have felt better when I was very young. I don't have a lot of memories from my childhood, but I can say experientially that to me, it was like experiencing the difference between death and life. That's how the remembering of this information has I've experienced it. For a long time, I really just felt like I was dying. I couldn't understand why. I always wondered, like, gosh, everybody's so normal, and they seem like they just like to go to work and make their money and go to baseball, and what is wrong with me? Like, what is wrong with me? Why does this feel like swimming through molasses? Why do I feel like walking up the steps is killing me? Like I can't even breathe. And that is, all of that's done like a totally 180. And I had debilitating headaches, and it was all based on, it all came from my beliefs. That's what was wrong with me, is what was I believing to be true about myself and God and the world around me. And figuring that out, I mean, it felt like I was so excited. I'm like running around telling my kids, guys, guess what? We're like an eternal spirit, and all we have to do is change the way that we're thinking and examine our core beliefs, and it's literally going to change our bodies and our health and our whole world. So, you could guess how that went over with everybody. But
Yeah, just the nature of existence, how it's all we're like the film projector.
mhm.
And if we're literally putting new information in our being or remembering a divine blueprint, the picture that we're perceiving is going to change.
Yes.
That's pretty, that was pretty groundbreaking. So if you're not liking what you're seeing around, you can change it and maybe grounding it down even to like really like, okay, like the glass is half full, the glass is half empty. And
Yeah, yeah.
what beliefs, yeah, what beliefs were programmed, I can't even talk. What beliefs were programmed in us that we see it in that way? Like,
Yeah.
you're saying that you have like debilitating headaches and how that can literally change your physical body and your physical life. Yeah, I think that's a really key thing to educate people on. And there's the divine blueprint, like you were saying a while ago, like you mightn't go too deeper in divine blueprint, but knowing that there is maybe a code, that maybe junk DNA that we have, for whatever reason, forgotten about, that there is eternal life. Why are we not seeing it? Like, if eternal life is real, why do we see everything contradict that? And not to say that to disprove that, but like, well, okay, well, what have we been feeding this consciousness? And what should we be feeding this consciousness to see that out picture of that? And I definitely could say in my own personal life, feeding this consciousness different information. When you were talking about cutting a tree or drinking water, that is something that has been very tangible and real for me to how I interact, or not interact, but like how I experience this world, how I experience nature, how I experience water, all the things you were talking about. So, and maybe just the not to like leave it open too much, but like for me, it's like the tangible like of life all around me, the tangibility of like things that are alive. Like, oh, is a tree alive? Yes. Is the air around you alive? Yes.
We'll look at why, if what I'm saying is true, why don't we see it? We could talk about that next time.
Hmm.
I'm going to finish reading this. This says,
Hmm.
so to effect true and lasting change within the body, mind, spirit system of the human being, one must go to the core of its manifest structure, the template, or you could say the thought energy blueprint upon which the entire system of consciousness itself comes to know being. The body is a hologram that can be directly affected by the substance of which it is composed, which is consciousness. In learning the structure of dimensionalization, one becomes progressively more masterful in directing this personal thought form to suit one's desired specifications. So we're all doing this, whether we want to believe we are or not, right? Like this is happening whether consciously or unconsciously. The core holographic template of the personal and the universal body is called the Cathara grid. So this is the 12 sphere tree of life, Cathara grid, 12 points. Cathara healing is the process by which the embodied aspects of human consciousness become more aware of and able to direct the intrinsic processes of holographic projection with the intention of restoring integrity to the function of the body-mind-spirit system. No thing is truly manifest. It only appears to be so due to the refraction of consciousness within the energetic relationships inherent to the holographic template, the original thought form construct upon which our universal structure is perpetually recreated. All creatures and things are spiritual beings having a manifest experience. No creature or thing can be ever divorced from its innate spirituality, only from the awareness of it. For life is the expression and substance of spirit, and manifest reality is but a dreamscape from which we eventually all do wake up. So,
Wow. Like a mic drop right there.
yeah, and we're gonna look at exactly how that works. It's a process. I'm talking about the physics and the chemistry, and we're going to
Mm.
talk about there's a lot of in our science biochemistry. We study a lot of biochemistry in medicine, but what we need to now focus on is called biophysics, and that is the energy that is actually creating us. So yeah, this has been super fun, Terry. Thank you.